Anthony, then that's okay, because I can't actually see.
No worries.
So apologies about this, everybody. We will get there. I don't have a lot to say anyway, so Anthony's going to go through the slides for me. So Anthony, if you could just go to the, yeah, thank you, and then to the welcome slide, that'd be great. So morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Pay Gap, Becoming an Employer of Choice for Diverse Talent. My name's Joe Price, and I'm from PayData. And Anthony, if I could just ask you to go to the next slide, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Actually, I think I might be able to actually, no, I don't think I can. Sorry. So just very quickly, for those of you that don't know us, we are a reward management sort of consultancy, and we've been helping organizations for over 20 years now with their reward challenges to help them attract, retain, motivate, and engage the talent they need to succeed. If you could go to the next slide, please, Anthony. Thank you. So our expertise covers the full spectrum of HR, including pay benchmarking, reward strategy and design, and job evaluation. Next slide, please, Anthony. Thank you very much. So I'm delighted to welcome today's presenters, Anthony Horrigan and Michelle Gyimah. Anthony is the CEO of Spktral, a leading company who mix technology and consultancy to provide insights and evidence for their clients to make the right changes in their organizations. And Michelle is the director of Equality Pays, a pay gaps consultancy dedicated to supporting organizations to close their pay gaps. Michelle spent 10 years at the Equality and Human Rights Commission and now works with private sector organizations using both her personal and professional insights to create equitable workplaces. Before I hand you over to Anthony and Michelle, a few points to note. Following today's webinar, you will receive an email that will include a copy of the slides that you're about to see, the link to the recording of the webinar, and Anthony and Michelle's contact details. So you'll have their contact details, so you'll be able to contact them after today's webinar with any questions or queries, or if you want to follow anything up. Anthony and Michelle are due to speak for about 30 minutes. Following this, they will then answer any questions. So if you would like to ask them a question, please type your question in the Q&A feature at any point during the presentation, and you should see that at the bottom of the screen, the Q&A feature. Just type it in as we go through, and then Anthony and Michelle will answer them at the end. And just a reminder, we're due to finish at about 11 a.m. So all that leaves me to do is to hand you over to Anthony.
Thank you. Well, I think this start has been analogous to gender pay gap reporting in the UK. Really a bit of a rocky start, but hopefully we'll bring it back to somewhere meaningful. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through where we are at the moment just to set the scene. Then we're going to look at some of the kind of steps you need to think about in the lead up to doing the action planning. Then we're going to talk about the action planning. And as Joe said, please, if you've got any questions, type them in the box as we go and we'll answer them at the end. So the past 2 years, the past 5 minutes have been quite challenging by anybody's standard, really. We've had to deal with COVID, the shift to remote working. We're in the midst of the Great Resignation. And on top of that, we've got a looming cost of living crisis. Whilst all that's been going on, gender pay gap reporting has just had its 5th birthday. So what we're going to quickly look at is the kind of progress that's been made, apart from the yummy cupcakes there. Now, for anybody that's spoken to me before, you'll know that this is possibly the only time I'm ever going to put any stock in the actual overall gender pay gap percentage. It's a coarse measure, it's an aggregated measure. However, when you're looking at a national level, then you can actually start to put a little bit of faith in the numbers. So in 2017, the median woman was paid 89.5 pence for every pound that was paid to the median man. So cut to 5 years later, and everything that we've seen in the media and all the progress and all the reports that are out there, and that's risen to 90 pence. So that is 5 years, half a pence difference in favour going towards, equity, as it were. So not much. So why are we making such glacially slow progress? Well, external factors that we just spoke about do explain some of the stalled progress, but not enough. one of the biggest reasons is that the basics aren't done correctly. There's a huge amount of misinformation out there, lots of incorrect prioritization. People kind of get dragged towards, as we've already spoken about, the gender pay gap percentage. And when I say dragged, I mean even the reports that people write, they get dragged to speaking about that, which, if you think about it, that percentage is just the aggregation of every single employee in one single organization down to 2 employees, and then the difference between the 2 employees. You couldn't get any coarser a measurement than that. So again, dragged away from the real truth. Because you get dragged away from the real truth and you get pushed towards this number that can be quite big and unchanging or wildly changing, depending on the size and shape of your organization, it leads to fear. Fear about that number and the fact that it's not closing, or that number is bigger than that person's number, et cetera, et cetera. But another one is the fear that if we start talking about this stuff, then people are going to start putting in equal pay claims, and it's all going to go wrong. So there is still quite a lot of misplaced fear around this subject. And then on top of that, just the lack of resources that are given to this. And I think a lot of that is to do with the actual, what people usually produce. So if you produce 14 numbers, then you kind of go, well, I only have to produce 14 numbers. What kind of resource do I need? Whereas if you see it in the way it should be seen, which is this is vital intelligence that tells us about our most important assets, then you probably put more resources towards that. Now, all things being equal, we're talking about pretty much static, so no improvement. So what's the proof of this? Well, obviously the proof is the fact that it hasn't changed, but also there is a correlated high incidence of problems with the data that's actually submitted by organizations. And we've seen that over the last 5 years. Now, these problems can be split into 2 very different categories. You've got fundamental errors, as in mathematical errors. People put in a negative percentage, but actually it's in favor of men because they've misread stuff. People put in their quarter information the wrong way round. And then you've got other types of errors, which we kind of put under the umbrella non-compliance. So they're kind of things where the legislation as it stands has not been followed to the letter. And we can discuss what kinds of non-compliance in the Q&A, because yeah, we can discuss that later. But for now, let's just call an error is an indicator that the legislative process or a legislated required document has not been carried out correctly or filled in correctly. So all of these obviously point to a lack of due diligence. The legislation's 7 or 8 pages long, so it's not a lot to read through, but it does point to a lack of due diligence. Now, in the first year, 2017, you would have probably expected a high error rate, which you would have then expected to over time decrease as corporate knowledge and education kind of took over and people, learned about what they were doing. However, this isn't happening. You can see we start off at about 20%, it drops. I would ignore 2019 because the government took away the requirement to actually report in 2019. So it's a kind of a bit of a phantom year. But then you can see there's a big pop. 2020 and 2021, we're talking 33 and 28% respectively. Now, I know that the sharp rise is coincident with the pandemic. However, what I haven't seen is reports from Companies House on the annual accounts data saying they've seen a 50% rise in the errors in those submissions. So just because there was an event, doesn't mean that it's fully connected to this. What I think it means is that the little resource and attention it had was completely stripped away by the pandemic. And under-resourcing, I think, is the big thing. What doesn't help is the misinterpretation on top of that, and then the kind of fear that with everything changing, what do we say? How do we do it? And it's a real shame, because it's vitally important to actually get this evidence in place before you even think about acting, before you think about stepping off of the first stone onto the next one. It's not about producing a list of metrics that you have to show to the government and show to your employees or prospective employees. It's about audited intelligence that can allow you to make actionable decisions that will change the course of your company over time. And, you know, if you didn't need any more kind of evidence to that, it's about your most valuable assets, your people. So it's got to be done correctly. So if we see the last 5 years as a learning curve, as we said, we would have expected people to kind of stick to very much the basics in the first year, and then we would have seen the evolution. And we have, to a certain extent, seen people stop talking about just the very basic stuff, and people expanding and evolving, talking about ethnicity, talking about social mobility, disability. So we can see that on one hand, but on the other hand, we have to realize that that has to be done. That evolution has to be done on a solid foundation, and we're just not seeing that. Research carried out by one of our associates. He's a chartered statistician and the author of the soon-to-be-released Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Guide on Voluntary Ethnicity Pay Gap Analysis. So he's really all over this. He's done research on the past 5 years of data, and he's shown that disengaged employers, and that's defined as employers with compliance errors who submit close or past deadlines and whose reports contain the bare minimum. Those disengaged employers were 20% less likely to have narrowed their gender pay gap between 2017 and 2021. Now that sounds like a pretty shocking figure. And a lot of that comes back to the way that this is approached in the first place and the resources that are put in front of it. And as I said, we are talking about legislation which is 7 or 8 pages long, and it's a process that can be put in place and actually done correctly quite easily. Now, obviously, the more, as the size of a company goes up and the complexity with legal entities, etc., it can get slightly more challenging. But if it's correctly resourced and you've got a good team, then it can be done very easily. Ahead of this webinar, we obviously working very closely with Paydata, and we take a lot of Paydata's clients who become clients of ours. And we said, okay, who signed up to the webinar? Let's do a health check, just to see it on the first instance, you know, if it's looking good. And then we also, when we found what we found, we did a slightly deeper dive and actually went to the websites of the people that are, some of whom are on this call. So we looked at around 75 organizations who are actually legislated to carry out gender pay gap reporting in the UK at the moment. And we looked at the compliance of, we ignored 2019, we looked at the compliance of 2020 and or 2021 to see what it was looking like. And we found that 75% of the 75 companies are currently non-compliant in accordance with the UK legislation, which is a huge figure. Now, I don't want to diverge too much from the topic of this webinar, but what we're talking about is like the A-level, degree level masters of where you can go when you're using the foundation of solid data, i.e. evidence. So we have to mention it because you can't step off the first stone until this is absolutely nailed, really. Unlike doing annual accounts, we find that it's rarely audited in an organization. And that, again, carries a huge risk, not particularly legally with the fact that the EHRC own this. And at most, you might get a letter from them saying that you need to do something. But a very definite investor, stakeholder, PR challenge, and kind of, you know, talent risk that you can carry. So it really is important to get this right. Absolutely important. And as we've said before, you know, this is about your people. So, you know, you owe it to every single one of them to get this right so that you can use, as we speak about the next phase, you can use that evidence to actually make actionable changes and evolve. So on that light note, I will hand over to Michelle, who will sweep away the dark clouds and show us why and how we can move forwards.
Thank you, Anthony. So we've just spoken about compliance, just talked about the value in ensuring that your data is accurate. What I want to talk to you now about is about your action plans, like what it is that you're going to be doing now that you have your data in place. So like Anthony said, we have 5 years worth of gender pay gap reports. And so I'm going to talk to you about what some of the kind of usual pitfalls that we see organizations do, so that when you're preparing for your next pay gap report, hopefully that you're not going to fall into the kind of same traps. And so in the middle of this screen, you can see a black square. And so I don't know if you recall, but in the summer of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, many organizations were in a place of having lots of conversations about what this meant for them as an organization, what their responsibilities were, and what it is that they could do. And one of the things that was suggested was for, on a particular day, to have black squares instead of their, kind of logos all over social media, to show solidarity around holding conversations and doing something about racial bias within workplaces. So that was the summer of 2020. If we were to fast forward to this summer now, summer 2022, and look at what organizations have actually done since putting out a black square, we would find that there's a huge misalignment between what organizations said they were going to do and what they have actually done. And, this is one of the things that I call a knee-jerk reaction, this feeling of we've got to do something, we've got to say something, so let's do something, without having any real thoughts or intentions behind the follow-up work. And we see this in, lots of different ways. So kind of bringing it back to the kind of the topic of conversation here. Another example would be, organizations, going for lots and lots of different types of, diversity and inclusion awards, and being, really proud of them and using those almost as social proof to say, well, look, we've won, best place for flexible working for the last 3 years, or, top employer for women. So that means that's who we are and that's what we do. But at the same time, we know that research has been done to say that 90% of women that have had to sign NDAs after maternity leave have felt pushed, have felt that this is the only course of action left to them. And some of these women will have worked at some of these organizations that have all these awards to say what a great place to work that they are. So again, it's that misalignment between say and do. It's those knee-jerk reactions of thinking, okay, what can I say to make it look like I'm doing the work? But then in reality, behind closed doors, these things are not happening. Now, kind of 5 or 10 years ago, that was normal. It was fairly normal for organizations to kind of have that very positive PR, but maybe not really doing the work. But we're in a different time now. So, Anthony set the context before to show all of the kind of global upheavals that have been happening. And with those global upheavals, employees are in a different space. We're in the middle of what's been dubbed the Great Resignation. There are lots of, values that employees have and have always had, but they're in a place where much more vocal about, questioning things, challenging things much more. And so this misalignment between what you say you are doing and what you're actually doing is no longer tolerable for so many people. And that is going to have a knock-on effect in your ability to attract talent to your organization. It's going to have a knock-on effect on your ability to retain your talent as well. So you do need to be very, very mindful in terms of what you say you are going to do. And you really need to be, have that plan in action to actually do the work. So what's been very interesting to see over the last few years is the way that, different people have been connecting the dots in terms of using pay gap data. And so when this was still voluntary, you know, there was a lot of reticence from organizations about how people are going to use this information. You know, we are worried we're going to be in a position where we can't really control the narrative. That is where we are, because as they say, you know, knowledge is power. And so, you know, I want to talk you through some of the ways in which people are using this information in a really innovative way. So the first kind of innovative way is around the interview situation. So we are currently going through the Great Resignation. Lots of people, you know, leaving their jobs, and sometimes they go into another job. Quite often now, for the first time, we're seeing people haven't got anything else lined up, but they need to leave. And employers like yourself are probably, you know, trying to fill those spaces. So you're in that kind of interview cycle. But gone are the days where you as an employer hold all of the cards and you have all of the power, and you can turn up to an interview, you can ask your questions, you might get a question asked to you by the interviewer, but really you hold all the cards and you can make the decisions as to whether you think that person is a suitable candidate or not. What we are now seeing is people using pay gap data and using the information that you put out about your organization to challenge you and to ask you questions. So I know I've seen it. You know, there are people on LinkedIn, career coaches, etc., advising, you know, interviewees, if you want to understand what this place is like to work in, you know, beyond what has been put out on your website and on Twitter, etc., here are the questions that you should be asking, and then see how they respond and then make a decision. So some of the questions that are coming up around your pay gaps. I've read your pay gap report and it says that your pay gap is X. What are you doing to close it? What does your action plan look like? Questions about representation, wanting to know what the gender and ethnicity breakdown within senior leadership is. Questions about career progression. You know, if I was going to an interview, you know, I'm a Black woman. As a Black woman, what are my career progression options within this organization? Questions about the charters that you've signed up to and wanting to know, okay, you've signed up to this charter, what are you actually doing in your organization? So this is a really savvy example of how people are using this information to make a decision about you. So it's no longer you just asking the questions, it's about them too, using that data, using that information to decide, is this somewhere where I actually want to work? And it's not that these things have never been important to people, they always have been, but the climate that we're in has changed a lot, where people do feel that it's okay for them to do that because they're putting those priorities first. So that's one example. Another example is the use of social media and the way in which, and I think this has, you know, really been kind of exacerbated by the pandemic, the way in which people are using social media to hold conversations about topics that are important to them, but maybe they felt they couldn't do so in the workplace. So, you know, an example of this would be around salary and pay transparency. Now, I don't know if any of you spend any time on Twitter. If you have, you might have company accounts or a personal account. Just go into Twitter, you can type in, you know, hashtag salary or hashtag pay transparency, and you will find numerous conversations where people are sharing their salaries. I saw one example of a woman who worked in the publishing sector, and she was leaving her role. And so she tweeted, this is my job title, this is where I worked, this was how much I earned, and I hope this is useful for anybody who wants to take my job or anyone who wants to move into this field. That in of itself is unheard of, but you could see the thread that people were, you know, unbelievably grateful for her for sharing that information. The Fawcett Society have a campaign called Show the Salary to try and get organizations, you know, to show the salary in their job adverts, because I think there's a lot of kind of secrecy from some organizations in not wanting to kind of open up that public conversation. And, you know, if any of you spend any time on TikTok, you will see that there are all sorts of conversations happening around people's salary, getting people to open up and tell the world how much they earn for the job that they do. So again, this is a really savvy use of, you know, having that information, and you can see the kind of, you know, thread, as it were. So we started with pay gaps, and now people are wanting to talk about pay transparency. And we know that 52% of people in Gen Z, they use social media to get their information when it comes to finances. So this could be, and probably does include, issues around pay gaps and pay transparency and career progression. And this is something that as an organization, you can't control. So even if you're not addressing those things in your action plan, that doesn't mean that the conversation is not happening. And again, the ripple effect is it can affect your ability to attract and retain talent. You need to be thinking about that. And one other thing I want to share with you is almost like a mini case study, and it's about the impact that the possibility of ethnicity pay gap reporting. So as we know, it's currently not mandatory, but there is a desire for it to be mandatory. So PensionBee, they did a survey with their consumers because they wanted to understand what their consumers thought about ethnicity pay gap reporting. And what they found is that 57% of their users, they want to see ethnicity pay gap reporting, and they want to see it from these pension funds. They want to see this information. And 72% of those people are women. So this is obviously a topic of conversation. This is a viewpoint. This is an issue that's very, very important to women. And we also know that 60% of the consumers, they expect to see much more diverse boards and much more diversity within senior leadership within pension funds. And this is now before it's even mandatory. And so as you can see, there's a trend here. So we're going from a topic of conversation that never was had, gender pay gap, to talking about pay transparency, to the expectation of ethnicity pay gap reporting. So what does that mean for you as an organization? Anthony, can you go to the next slide?
Sure. Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that this big kind of learning curve, as it were, is creating disconnects. And although some companies, very few, but some companies are nailing the full kind of scope of what's happening here, there's a lot that's required to actually become the ideal employer that can not only attract but retain the best talent. The CMI recently published a report called the Everyone Economy, and it had some pretty startling statistics. 52% of employees said they felt that they'd been overlooked for workplace opportunities because of how they identified themselves. 6.9 million employees felt discriminated against because of their background, and 51% of employees said they had witnessed or experienced some form of discrimination in the workplace. So all of what we've spoken about, all of these issues need to be addressed in order to turn that around. And I think that all of this, to answer somebody's question saying that, do we think that the Great Resignation is to do with Brexit? That will be a factor, but I think a bigger factor is when faced with something like a pandemic, which if you look at the way it played out in the media, it does make people look at their whole life. And I think anything that was sitting maybe at the periphery of their mind, things that they weren't 100% happy with, toxic bosses, etc., all of those little things, when you consider, oh, well, I'm fit and well now, I think it makes you question, what do I want to do? And I think that's possibly a bigger reason why we're seeing the Great Resignation, is because people just want to do something else, or they want to be somewhere where they're included. In fact, there was a McKinsey report that one of my non-exec directors sent me today that was saying that, the reason that people are leaving is because they don't feel included or feel valued. And again, I don't think that's just about money. I really don't. And I don't think it's about lots of overt stuff. I think it's about just doing these basics well and actually saying, we see that there are different types of people, and we want different types of people to work here. And this is how we're kind of moving forward and trying to make it more fair. I think it's really basic stuff. People just want to see evidenced, solid progress. It's as simple as that. Michelle, so I think we've kind of covered all of the background, and some of it's a little bit messy. It is. However, we're assuming that people are able to kind of, get all this sorted and actually push forward. So what do we do in terms of starting the action plan? What's the first step?
So the first step is that you need to be clear on having a solid foundation and understanding your why. So in the famous words of Simon Sinek, start with why. So why are you putting this action plan together? So, are you doing it because you can see further down the road that you're going to have, a talent retention issue? Can you see that you're not attracting people? Are you seeing that, you've got, a toxic work environment and people are really unhappy and unproductive? Why is it that you're putting this action plan together? And I hope that, looking at the slides and things that Anthony has shown, that it's not just to be compliant or not to just look like you're doing something, because you want to be bringing people along with you and you want them to trust and believe that you are doing this for the right reasons. So it's important that you have clear purpose and that you use that as the foundation for your action plan. And it's really important to remember that, you don't want to have those knee-jerk reactions. You don't want to be putting things out and having platitudes, etc. You want to be very mindful and thoughtful about what it is that you're doing and why it is you're doing it. And see this as an opportunity, really. I understand that it's challenging, and I understand that you have, other, pressures in the organization, etc. But this deserves due diligence, as Anthony was saying. This deserves, you really taking the time to plan this through, and it gives you the opportunity to build in that resilience and to ensure that your organization is still relevant in years to come. We have, Gen Z moving into the workplace. You want to make sure that you are still relevant and that they are choosing to work with you. So it's about kind of shifting your mindset around why you're doing this work and seeing it as what it is, an opportunity rather than a burden. So one of the key things that will help you, excuse me, to ensure that your action plan is as successful as it can be, is to make sure that it is actually connected to the rest of your business. Now, I have seen, quite a few times when it will be the kind of pet project of one department, or it's something that's been given to one person to fix or to do with no support. They don't know anything about gender pay gap. They have absolutely no idea how they're going to close it, but they've been tasked with that without any support. That will not work. What it needs to be is fully connected. It needs to be an integral part of your organization. So that means it needs to connect to all of the other parts. So whether that's business planning, strategy, operations, D&I, and most importantly, your talent. This is who you are supposed to be doing it for. So it's really important to make sure that, there's a thread running through this. So it's not just the, one person that's responsible for it, and it's not just one team that's responsible, but it is interconnected. And having that interconnectedness will enhance and improve your chances of success, because it's dependent on other aspects, and other aspects of the business are dependent on your action plan as well. So how can you ensure that it's properly resourced and supported? Now, Anthony talked about this, the fact that we've seen over the years that when it comes to this work, it's almost resource strapped. And that has led to some of the issues that we've seen in terms of not making much progress. So the first thing I would say is around time. You do need to give this work the time. The deadline is the same time every year. It's April. It's like Christmas. It's not a surprise when you're supposed to put this information in. However, that doesn't mean that you could and should leave it to the last minute. It deserves much more respect than that. I think it deserves the time for you to kind of, build a team and to think about what it is that you're going to be putting together in your action plan. And we all know that the more time that you can give it, the better it will be, because you've given yourselves the space to figure out what the problem is, figure out where you are, test some different solutions, think about how you're going to implement it, think about how you're going to, plan for resources, etc. It's almost impossible to do that when you put your plan in the month before. But if you were to start, say, now, what you would produce would be very, very robust and fit for purpose. The next thing, I think the next one is around, let me see, the team. Yeah. So again, it's about, giving it the respect that it deserves. And it deserves to have a team rather than, one person from the reward team or one person from the HR team. And having the team builds that resilience. Just from a really practical point of view, if you have several people, spread out from the organization who are responsible for this, if one person, I don't know, breaks their leg and can't come into work for a while, is a long-term sick, shared parental leave, goes on sabbatical, goes on maternity, whatever, the usual ebbs and flows of business, you have a team of people who are working on this, then you can absorb that. You can be flexible and you can manage, workloads accordingly. But if you have one person and they are, absent from the office for long periods of time or they leave, your action plan just falls to dust. So it's about building in that resilience and saying, okay, this is important to us. So we're going to build a team around this to ensure that it can carry on despite the ebbs and flows of the organization. And when you have that team, that helps with the accountability because it's no longer one person's responsibility. Yeah. And that helps to build that internal trust as well as the external trust. You're showing we are taking this seriously. We have tasked X amount of people to be working on this. And we have a senior sponsor who's going to make sure that things are driven through and make sure that things are implemented. And that accountability will go a long way to engage your current employees. And remember, your current employees are your ambassadors. They will be talking about what's happening in your workplace. So this could be a way of helping you retain people and attract new people as well. People know, oh, there's a dedicated team, senior sponsor that's working on this. This sounds like a place that I could be at home in and I want to work in. And the last thing is around expertise. When this was being drafted, it was never meant to be a test to see if you can do this by yourself. There are no prizes and no medals for the organization that can do all of their own gender pay gap all by themselves. But equally, there's no shame in getting in that expertise because that's what you do. You can't be an expert at everything. The things that you are not an expert in, you get outside help. If you had, say, for example, I don't know, a complicated IT system that had to be implemented into your organization because the law changed. If you couldn't do it yourself, you would outsource it. There'd be no questions asked. That's just the way things happen, right? You need to be looking at your pay gaps work in the same way. If you don't have the resources, if you don't have the time, if you don't have the expertise, or even if you have all of these things, but you want peace of mind, it's okay to get people in to support you. There are people out there who this is their bread and butter. They know this stuff inside out and they want to support you to make sure that you create the best action plan for your organization possible. So they are the key things that I would say are the real kind of building blocks when it comes to your action plan and making sure that it's resourced and supported so that you can, produce the best that's possible for your organization.
Thank you. Right, just to recap, because I think we're getting quite a lot of questions, so I'd like to dive into some of the questions. We spoke about where we are at the moment and the fact that progress has been glacial in a lot of ways. We also spoke about quite high kind of error rates, etc. But again, just to give you a little bit of assurance, these kind of things can be fixed. It's very easy to fix. Somebody said in one of the questions, this is quite complicated. It is, but it's complicated if you've just been pinged to do this yourself and you have to learn it from scratch. So again, to go to what Michelle said, you need to get expertise in there. If you start from a solid foundation and you do this methodically and you do it in enough time and you actually do something which is, let's call it revolutionary. You start with the outcomes you want, and then you plan the resources and the work you need to do to get there. A bit like planning how you're going to, do a route around somewhere, or how you're going to, what you're going to do when you're on holiday, whatever. If you plan it like that, then you will avoid these knee-jerk reactions. And also, if you have the expertise to tell you, ignore that, that's noise, then when you get some aggression coming from places, because there's always an increased amount of activism, when you get that, how about that, that's a bad this and that's about that, then you can actually confidently and without knee-jerking say, we don't put stock in that. This is what we put stock in, and this is what we're doing. So again, it means you out. It kind of gives you a purpose and gives you a better voice, a better message, and allows you to connect the dots, actually spend your energy on connecting the dots and looking at the stuff over time, what's happening. And all of this will allow you to actually use all of that data, all of that insight to put together an action plan, which is for one thing and one thing only, is not to close a gap. It is to make your workplace a workplace which is more inclusive, more diverse and richer, and therefore more profitable. By doing all of this work, it will make the people that are working with you, to be fair, there will be some people that might actually go, I don't want this, and they may move on. But what you will get is a majority of people that will feel that they can be themselves, they can work in that environment, and they'll stay with you and they'll trust you because you're open and transparent. So that's what we're talking about. A lot of work's required to get to the stage before you actually do the action plan. But if you do all of the pre-work and then you push through with a good, decent action plan and then start to act on it, then again, you end up assessing every year and making small adjustments or big adjustments, but those adjustments are all done from a place of knowledge and kind of safeness instead of knee-jerking and kind of just pinging from one thing to the next. So that's what we've been trying to get to. I think, Joe, if you want to come in now and kind of corral the questions, and Michelle and I would be happy to answer, the ones that you have.
No problem. So yeah, I'll pick out some questions, Anthony and Michelle, but if we don't get through all of them, we'll respond to every question as per the sort of stuff that goes out in the email afterwards. So I think the first one is interesting. Will you be letting companies know who were or were not compliant? So you've done that audit, Anthony, of the organizations. Will you be letting them know?
Oh, GDPR. So what I can't do without everybody's single permission is just mark it out. What we can offer is we'll offer everybody, Michelle and I, 15-minute health check, free of charge, confidential, just to let you know where you are, because it is important. And I think the most important thing there is to actually hear from you and actually, how is this resourced? What do you do? What mechanism do you use to actually make sure this is done correctly? And as we said before, if this was annual accounts, you would have accountants, it would be audited, et cetera, et cetera. This is no less important. The fact that there's no legal teeth behind it, it's still about your, valuable assets. So it needs to be done correctly. So more than happy to kind of, give you a bit of a health check. And again, maybe talk about where you are with, where you want to be and what you're doing in terms of action plan. So yeah.
Great. So get in touch, basically. If they get in touch with you both, that'd be perfect. Brilliant. Given the poor performance of UK companies in completing their gender pay gap reporting correctly, what challenges will there be for them in undertaking ethnicity pay gap reporting?
I think that question needs to be slightly modified. First of all, it's not just the poor performance, i.e. all the compliance errors. It's the emphasis that's been put on gender pay gap reporting, i.e. that gender pay gap percentage. So if people stop talking about that and start talking about what Michelle said, which is representation, actually a better definition for the gender pay gap would be equal pay is two people doing same or similar work for the same value. And gender pay gap, I would change to the gender representation gap, which is the differences between men and women on the pay scales in the organization. So basically, do you have centers of gravity of one particular type of people, like women that are below the kind of average or middle for men up here. And it won't just be a pay gap, there'll be pay gaps. It's like Swiss cheese. And you will find, like, for instance, you will find that, missing women from, say, the board, missing women from, senior management, but you'll find quite a lot of women, say, in the lower paid roles. So that's what we mean by that. So if you then use that, if you're doing that with ethnicity, and then you add in the complexity of it's not just about people that aren't white, because you will have different lived experiences with different ethnicities. But again, it's all really doable. All you need is to start that process and communicate with your employees, and they will give you the data you need, because they'll trust you that why you're doing it is because you want to make sure that there aren't any hidden biases. Guess what? There's biases in every system. So you want to root those out, and then you need to, in the first instance, you're not going to be acting, you're going to be gathering data. And so to do it like that, yes, it's more complex, but it's very manageable. And you need to be bringing the employees along on that journey, because they're the ones that have the data that you need to access. So yeah, more difficult, but the guide that's coming out possibly in the autumn now will talk about the differences between, the very basic view that most people have of gender and how it needs to be evolved to encapsulate ethnicity. So yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Are there any providers with technology to help this particular organization with their gender pay gap data collection and reporting? So they're an organization of 16,000 employees with complex pay arrangements, and their execs are asking them to pull data together twice a year so they can monitor progress and take actions.
Well, I think Anthony and Michelle. No, in all seriousness, this is where you read the original legislation and you have to giggle a bit, because it makes it sound like there's somebody sat there with a piece of paper and a pencil, putting men on one side, women on the other side, and writing down what they're, et cetera, et cetera. One of your clients, Joe, is obviously, in healthcare, and they have 70 plus establishments. In between that, there's a mix of different legal entities, and it's about 13 to 15,000 employees. It's manageable. It's easy to do. The whole point about any of this is to get, first of all, what are you trying to achieve? So it sounds like I want to measure this and monitor it on an ongoing basis, and then figure out from what we see on an ongoing basis, how we can act to actually increase representation at certain levels in the organization. So that is a full end-to-end process, but it's manageable. It just has to be correctly resourced, and it has to be planned, and it has to be, the education needs to come up. So actually, when you talk about senior leadership asking questions, sometimes the questions they ask are actually, it's the wrong question. So it becomes the responsibility of the team that's leading this work to actually educate the people at the very top, so that when they get asked the difficult questions, they can then go, that's the wrong question to ask. This is what you should ask, and this is what we're doing. So again, it's a kind of cyclical thing of education and improvement. It's not a simple kind of, here, pay some money, get some of this. Anybody, any provider that says, we can do that for you, just give us some money and we'll give you some results, be wary. What you want to hear is, what outcomes are you after? And start from there. And that's exactly what Michelle would say. Where do you want to be? Let's assess where you are. Let's see where you want to be, and let's plot a route to get you there. So yeah, but it is tricky. And that's why we said it wasn't ever designed. And if you think about it, this was actually designed as a kind of first step. The fact that the government hasn't done anything in 5 years, or even done its own 5-year report on where this is going, is telling, but it was only ever designed as the first step.
Well, I think that brings us on actually probably to the next question. So what pressure is being put on the government to review some of the guidance? So they've given the example around salary sacrifice, where one person might have a salary sacrifice bike and somebody doesn't, they're on the same hourly rate. And I guess sort of they've given an example, but I think it sort of leads on from what pressure is being done to review some of this stuff.
Yeah, so there's two things there. One, on the 5th of April 2022, the Secretary of State was supposed to have released a 5-year report on how it's all been going and what they're going to do next. A friend of ours, a barrister called Horrigan, wrote an open letter to the Cabinet Office saying, "Hey, you're in contravention of your own legislation. What are you going to do about it?" She promptly received a reply, and the ending to it was pretty much tells you everything. "We will be releasing a report in due course." So that's where you are with the government. As far as the intricacies of the legislation, this is where a set of numbers falls short, because what you need to be doing is going, in our particular organization, we have seen that if we just do the legislation, it looks unfair. But you then need to do another set of data, a bit like some people did with furlough last year, where they said, our company had furlough, and so the results you're going to read are pretty much a lie because it's only 22% of our workforce. However, what we did is we topped everybody in our minds back up to 100%, and our figures have changed by 0.5% since the year before. So you need to do that other part of work that adds back on the salary sacrifice. I can tell you now from experience that in 10 times out of 10, people that thought that salary sacrifice was going to make a difference, even in independent schools where a lot of the female teachers and kind of catering staff were using salary to offset against school fees, really didn't make a big difference. 0.5%, I think, is the most I ever saw. So that kind of thing is an assertion you have in your mind because you see it, you know, the stark difference between 20 and 15. But actually, when you build up to the big set of data, it doesn't affect it that much.
Okay, it's useful to know. Another question then. So understanding changes in the gender pay gap and reducing the gender pay gap are really hard. Are there any case studies of organizations that have successfully done either of these?
Michelle.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but I do think that it's a little bit telling as to where our focus always is. And this is what we've been talking about. And I understand that because we organizations being asked to come up with a figure, and that's what everybody looks at, and then people make assumptions about an organization based on the figure. So whenever I get asked questions about that, which is always about how can we reduce our pay gap, because that's the focus, I always like to bring people to what pay gap reporting should really be about. And it should be about looking at representation in your organization and asking those questions. Okay, well, if we have a dearth of women and they're always stuck at a specific level, what is happening here? Why is that happening? So rather than always and only focusing on that end number, we need to take a step back and we need to say, okay, what do our numbers tell us about us internally at all the different quarters? Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities for us to do better so that we can see more women progressing? Or if it's an issue of women not coming into the organization at all, or ethnic minorities, or whatever data you're looking at, what is it that we actually need to be doing? And it's not to say that end number isn't important, because there'll always be people that will just be looking at that. But I think it's about being able to step back and say, yes, that has its merit, but this is the true sustainable work that we're looking at. We are looking at making our organization more inclusive, and we are doing that in these ways because our data tells us this. And it might be that it doesn't affect the number at the end. And it might be that our data never looks great, but we know with confidence that these are the changes that are happening and these are the positive changes that are happening. So I think it's about kind of turning it on its head and acknowledging that it's there, but shifting the attention to the true work, because I think, a lot of us get really caught up with we don't want to be in the bad league of tables. And it's like, yeah, you might look like that, but that doesn't mean to say that you should focus on that. This is the sustainable work that you're looking at. So that is how I always answer the question. And I know that for a lot of organizations, it's not what they want to hear, but I think it's what you need to hear. 5 years on, this is what we're talking about. How do we move beyond just always looking at that percentage?
And I think that also answers Jane Jones's question, which has been, what good actions help close the gap? That's, as hopefully you've just kind of taken away from what Michelle said, that's not what you want to be asking. The pay gap is a slow end of tail indicator of things. And also it can lie. So if you look at a construction company that's 80% men and 20% women, And because of the way that they make fundamental changes, and the fact that the construction industry in terms of homes is changing to be more modular, and things are built in factories and they come to site and you just put them together with nail guns, etc. Add all that together, and now you are able to attract more women into the lower paid jobs on a site. Your pay gap may go up because you have a center of gravity of low paid women at the bottom of your organization. So it may go up. However, that's a good thing. So it's that evolution between when people say, why is your pay gap this? You go, that's the wrong question you should be asking me. What you should be saying is, how did you manage to get 5 in 10 women applying for these roles when in the past it was 0 in 10 or 1 in 10? Mm-hmm. The key there is, over 5 years, did the women, those 5 women that joined with the 5 men, where did they go?
Yes, how did they progress?
Did the women stay and the men go up, or did the women go, so again, there's your kind of PhD after that. But in the first part, good actions to close gap is the wrong thing. Good actions to actually make your place more inclusive and more attractive and a better place to work and more diverse, etc., is where you go. The gap will follow, maybe eventually, but that's not the focus.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you both for sharing that. It's really useful. And then just one more question before we finish up. Michelle, this one's for you. Over what timescales should companies aim to implement their action plan?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question. And I guess it depends on what you decide to put in it, because every organization is going to be different. It's going to have different things that they're focusing on. And even if you're doing the same thing as another organization, how that actually looks in practice will be different as well. And it might be that you need to build in more time to get the resources in, or build in more time for specific things to be in place before you can implement things. I think for me, it's not necessarily about saying, right, we're going to implement this action plan within 4 months and we expect to see results. It's about consistently moving and ensuring that you are closing that misalignment between what you're saying and you're doing, and that you're communicating this well internally. You know what people are like. We find it very, very difficult with change. And you start talking about gender pay gap, you start talking about ethnicity pay gap, people get worried and have lots of questions, and there'll be quite a lot of resilience. And you might find that you have extra work to do, in terms of education and communication, etc., before you can start implementing things. So again, it's a little bit like, how long is a piece of string? It really depends as to what is happening within your organization. But for me, as long as you are consistent in what you are doing and you're consistently moving forward, I think that's much more important than saying we have an action plan and it will be implemented within 4 months and we expect to see great results, because then you're focusing again on the wrong things, looking at different ways of measuring success, and they're not necessarily the right things. And also, how it is, you put a plan together, you say we're going to do it in 4 months, life happens, business happens. And so it's about having that resilience and flexibility and always focusing on the things that are most important. And it's not the optics of being seen to do great things or being seen to implement in this action plan. It's about the real sustainable work that will make the changes that you want to have a more inclusive workplace.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle and Anthony. That was brilliant. Thank you for answering the questions and for taking us through the presentation. It's really, really insightful. There are a few questions that we've not had time to answer, so we'll share those with you, and then if you could answer them, and we'll circulate the responses with the rest of the slides and stuff when they go out to people after today's webinar. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Anthony, could you just go through a couple of slides that's brilliant. So just before we finish, everybody, just wanted to let you know about the Pay Data HR and Reward Conference coming up on Tuesday, the 27th of September. So not long away at all. Now, it's happening in central London. So it's a central London location. It's a cross-sector event. So it's, we're inviting organizations and people from a wide range of sectors. We're bringing together some guest speakers to talk about topical issues such as pay plans and expectations, tackling recruitment and retention challenges, introducing wellbeing training for managers, sustainability in the workplace. And we'll also at the event be having some sector-specific HR discussion forums. And that's an opportunity for people to exchange advice and experience on current challenges at a sector level. We're offering an early bird discount until the end of July. So there is a discount if you'd like to attend. If you buy your ticket before the end of July, we're offering a discount. We're also offering a discount for not-for-profit organizations and also for organizations that are sending multiple delegates. So if you're interested, if you want to book or you have any queries, full details are available on our website, but you can also email events@paydata.co.uk. It's going to be a really great event, and we'd love to see you there. So finally, I just again want to say thank you to Anthony and Michelle for taking the time, to join us today for a great talk. Some really useful information. It's very, very insightful. I think one of the main takeaways for me is around, it really is about what you are doing as an organization and what is your plan, and just to make sure that you're making progress and moving forward. And I think I think that came across quite clear. And I think that, it's really, really important for people to understand that. So thank you very much.